Welcome and good evening to our very first workshop of 2020. City Manager Coleman, would you do our roll call for us, please?
Certainly. Councilmember Neblett. Here. Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Mayor Abrams.
Here.
Councilmember Knutson.
Here.
Councilmember Juniman.
Here. First item, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Neblett, seconded by Juniman. Approval of the agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Unfinished business, we have none. New business, we have two items tonight. One is the U.S. Census count update. That is going to be Joe Sharon. And then we've got boards and commissions appointment process. I think that's you, City Manager Coleman. So, Communications Manager Sharon, would you like to join us at the DS?
Sure, thanks. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the update on the census. This is a project that has started for the city about 2.5 years ago. When I first started here, we had a visit from the census, and they had told us it was going to be really important that we reach out on a community level to help sort of aid what they were doing at the federal level and what we're doing at the state level to really get grassroots and count everyone, a fair, accurate, complete count, because there's a lot on the line. And I'm just going to go through the slides here and show you a couple of things that we've been working on, both at the federal level, the state level, and then how we're working together as a city on the complete count here. So here's the basic timeline. Folks should start looking at their mailboxes come March. They will get a postcard that invites them to fill out the census. You don't have to fill out the census on April 1st. You could fill it out way before April 1st. In fact, and doing some research for this, I found out Anchorage, Alaska, there's a village up in Anchorage, Alaska, that is the first to be counted on January 27th. Just to make sure they get the count, especially as we know here from some of our travels, the ice is frozen, so you have your better transportation access because you can drive over the lakes. So this is sort of the timeline that you're seeing there. If you as a citizen or resident, as a resident, don't start to fill out the census by mid-April, you will hear from the Census Bureau. What's complicated about this year, or different about this year, is there are going to be many fewer paper forms, and they're hoping people go online to fill it out or to call and fill it out, which, while folks who are familiar with or want to advance technology and be in the 21st century think it's great, there is a digital divide. A lot of people don't have access to internet at their home. A lot of people don't have access to the English version at home, and so what we're doing here as a state is to really reach out to make sure we're giving the people the resources they need to fill out the census. If you don't fill it out by early midsummer, you're going to start to see what are called enumerators knocking on the doors, physically coming to tell people it's time to fill out the census. And that's why it's really important for our community, because of fears around the census. If you're new to our community or new to the United States, and somebody from the government comes and starts banging on your door saying, fill out this, we want to count you, that's very fearful. So what we're asking from a complete count committee, and what the state is asking, is that we are reaching out to our community elders, to our church leaders, to our faith leaders, to community leaders, to make sure they're the ones who are telling people from their community to fill out the census. If I, as the communications manager, go out and asks, it's very intimidating. They're not going to answer me. If someone who is their pastor or who is their black captain tells them, or an aunt or an uncle, so that's why that grassroots is really, really important. The census this year looks pretty much the same as it has in years past. There's been a lot of questions around, do you have to fill out the whole census? Can you leave questions out? The general rule of thumb is please fill out the whole census, but you don't have to. You can mail in an incomplete census. This is what it's going to look like. People will start to get it. And it's about households, and it's where you are at the time of they take the count, not where you're going to be, not where you take the count. There will not be a citizenship question. I think a lot of us know that, but people who read the news or catch stuff on Twitter or social media or Facebook might not know. Again, with some of the social media, a lot of misinformation out there. It's important for us to let people know there will not be a citizenship question on the 2020 census. Here's what's important: language information. The census will be available in almost 50-some different languages, including American Sign Language. Some of the main languages for our community: Spanish, Somali, Hmong, and American Sign Language. We're the city, but we, in conjunction with the state of Minnesota, the state demographer's office, they're kind of the point on this one. Please go to their website if you have any issues or any questions. They have all of the information available. And here's some of what you can do. Before you call the Chicago regional office, I would contact one of our local people first. And this is just if somebody shows up at your door, they should have an identification, they should have a badge, they should have all of that. Who access to the data? Right now, everybody's worried, who has my data, who has access to it? The president will not see it. The administration generally, with the exception of census, will not see it. Only the Census Bureau can access the data. It won't be shared with law enforcement or ICE or the court system. So it's only the people who need to use it to count and to ensure we have a complete count can see it. Missed in Minnesota. This is why the complete count committees were formed. This is why it's so important that we hit the ground running. As you know, young children, people of color, indigenous people, low-income households. The census does have a plan to count people who are incarcerated, who are in group living conditions or group living. So they are working on making sure those. But this is where they're really reaching out to us to make sure we get out to the community so that young people, people of color, indigenous people, and low-income households are counted. We've worked a little bit with the school district, ISD 622. Josh Anderson is their point person. I'm going to try to work with him to make sure that he is connected with both our Complete Count Committee and Ramsey County's Complete Count Committee to have the information they need to send census documents home with the students. Parents here know most of the time you learn about what's happening in your kid's school when you dig through his or her school bag. So that's a key way to get to parents. Impacts of an undercount, and this is why it's so important. There's a lot of money on the line. Guess how much? Can anybody guess how much money? We're looking at $15 billion as a state. The state of Minnesota receives $15 billion every year from the federal government. If we don't get a complete count, we could lose our 8th congressional seat. Obviously, the seats will be realigned, so we don't know who will get phased out. If that does happen, we hope it doesn't. We get resources for our schools. The census data helps with what Steve does, planning roads, helps with what Jeff does, business development. Target uses the census to, when it builds a store, okay, we're going to build a store in a high-density community. That means we need to put in smaller tables, smaller chairs. We need to really plan for an urban environment, or if they're out in a rural community, plan for a rural community. Census, where the factory stores. So all of these things, it's not just about the money, it's not just about the social services. Businesses rely on this. I mean, think about when we do planning. We rely on understanding where people are and how many people there are, and schools especially need to know what's the population of kids coming through. So these are some of the dollars. Special education grants, almost $200 million. Medicaid, $6 billion. I'm sure St. John's and the folks over at Health East are really concerned about those Medicaid dollars. State health insurance programs and federal transit grants. As we know, we're trying to build 2 BRT lines and expand transportation services. Those are, you know, they're all counted based on your census and your per capita population. Here's what we could do. We're already, they already have us slotted to miss possibly a seat. Those you could see the states: Arizona, Colorado, Florida, North Carolina, Texas. Those are the states that are growing that might get our 8th congressional seat. Here's what's really important for folks who do want to work on this with us. The census obviously is broken up into census tracts, And in our community of Maplewood, there are several that you go to this map, and it's an interactive map, and you could click and you could see sort of the census data in the community, but you could also see how many people return their census. So any census tract with fewer than 80%, they're really heavily targeting making sure we get out and people get out the vote, but get out the. I'm so used to saying get out the vote, but get out the enumerators. Make sure get out the word. Let people know that's coming. Preventing an undercount. What are we doing? On our website at maplewood.gov, we have this: commit to be counted. It's just your pledge, your personal pledge to say, hey, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to fill out the census when it comes to my house. I'm going to go online and fill it out. I'm going to go paper ballot, or I will call the service and fill it out. Again, while this is a federal policy, the count falls under federal jurisdiction. The state knows what is on the line, and it is not leaving anything to chance. The Walz administration has made it a priority. Any agency that touches the public has a role in making sure we count everyone. So they've appointed, or they've sort of, the lead on this is the state demographer's office, and they're the ones that are coordinating a lot of the trainings for complete count committees, and they're the ones that are really taking up the mantle on this, and they've coordinated all of the complete count committees to make sure we're sharing information. So things like some of the Census 101 flyers and some of the census job flyers, to make sure they're being printed in Spanish, in Hmong, in Somali, and to make sure people who would be undercounted are getting the information in their language, in their communities. And they've been a great asset for us. The handouts, the 101, what we're possibly going to lose, and the community outreach toolkit is all on both the state demographer's website. They've allowed us to do some custom logos, so we can really custom it to We Count Maplewood, We Count Ramsey County. This way, it's not this scary federal government thing. This is a community thing. Oh, I live in Maplewood. They want to make sure we're counted, and here's why. We in Maplewood have done a couple of key things. All throughout the summer, we worked with Public Safety and Park and Recreation, and when they had their summer events, we had a census table to make sure we were handing out those one-page flyers. Throughout the next few months in Maplewood Living, we will be running stories to let people know. In January, they're trying to hire census workers. Their goal was to hire almost 4,000 workers. We're close to that goal. They still have to hire about 1,500 more. So what we did is we helped them out, and we put this Census Bureau hiring in the Maplewood area in our newsletter. These are, if you're interested, if you have constituents that are interested, these are great jobs. They pay $22 an hour, up to in Ramsey County, flexible hours. And a lot of what they're looking for are those field workers, people to get out and knock on doors and make sure that people understand that they, if they didn't fill out the census, we're here to remind you to do it, and we're going to do it for you right now. Again, social media, here are their accounts, and every time I post about the census, I will connect back to them or tag them, hashtag WeCountMinnesota. Apartments, they're a barrier sometimes, as you know, and that's where some of our undercounted folks are. There has been an ask from the state and the Complete Count Committee at the state level to pass a local level ordinance that all it does is says apartment complexes have to allow census takers into the apartment or on the grounds. It's very similar to, it's already a federal statute, but just sort of a belt and suspenders approach to make sure at the local level we're doing this. I'm just putting this out there. There might be some interest from you to pass that ordinance. We could have a broader conversation at a later date, but that is one of the asks that the state demographer's office has asked us to do to make sure. I think Edina was the first one to pass such an ordinance, but it's model language. It only applies to census workers, no one else. So. Libraries are going to be really, really important. The Ramsey County Library and libraries throughout the state are going to be really critical, especially if you don't have internet access. As we know already, Libraries are critical for people who don't have access to the internet to fill out and do a variety of things online. There are going to be centers set up at the library. So if people have any questions, send them to any one of the libraries in Ramsey County, Maplewood, Roseville, up in White Bear, and they'll be able to help people. They'll have the know-how to walk people through and make sure we're counting our folks. Again, there's a lot of stuff. Not everyone's meant to know everything, especially the people, especially some of the people who are on complete count committees doing some of the grassroots work. The state has a website. It's set up. It's very helpful. And if there are any questions, I have enough contacts to get you to the right answer. And so with that, what I'm basically asking is between some of the work that's already been done, trying to organize amongst the faith community, and a lot of the work that we've already done with community outreach, with public safety, please let your communities know, especially communities that would traditionally be undercounted, that the census is coming, nothing to fear, no one could see this except the census, and the correct count benefits all of us in the community. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much for this presentation. It is absolutely crucial, and council members, I don't know, I certainly recognize how important the census is. I was at a regional mayor's meeting I think it was in November, and they had a representative from the census there, and they talked about the 2010 census, and Minnesota kept our 8th seat by 8,700.
Wow.
And that's it. We were that close to losing it. And so that is the big fear, that we would lose that representation in Congress, and then along with the money as well. So we really want to make sure that we get this out there. So that is really important. You know, I think the very first meeting that I was ever in with you was with the manager, the local director of the census, when you first started here. I didn't realize that was 2 years ago. Boy, it really flew by fast, didn't it? But I'm still on the emails, so I get the emails that are being sent out. I understand that the U.S. Census Bureau is rolling out a national advertising campaign tomorrow. How can we use that here in Maplewood?
So a couple of things that we're doing in Maplewood are obviously social media. So everything we get from the state, we roll out. Social media, anything from the state that applies to our community, we will roll out. We're going to start to do more of commercials, more outreach, more online. Our website already has a presence right on the front page. It links you right to the state's information. A lot of this is grassroots. A lot of this is when you're in community meetings, when you're meeting with people, just express. And I could give you all the one pagers, so you have the information right there, ready to go. In all of your meetings, in all of your official meetings, in all of your informal meetings, it really explains to people. And it's not just you guys as council, but it's our obviously public safety is important. Park and Rec, Public Works, our community development folks, anybody who's working, especially with communities that are hard to count, let them know it's coming.
Okay. It'll be interesting to see. I think there's going to be 1,000 different pieces of lit, or
Yeah.
I'm sure video and all sorts of things, and it's coming out tomorrow. Councilmember Niblett.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Sharon, just a couple of questions. You talked about the libraries and folks being able to access the library and come there. And the one thing that comes to mind is are homeless people going to be counted?
Yes, there's a strategy to count homeless people. They're working specifically on a count to work with shelters to count homeless people.
Okay, cool. And the other question is the form that you showed us the actual form?
Yes.
So I noticed on the race page, there are lots of different races, but there's no box, or at least I didn't see a box for biracial people,
Okay.
which I thought was interesting.
There is some work around being able to fill out. I'm not quite sure about this, but I know there are some options to fill in other.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
City Manager Coleman.
Joe, I have a group of women I meet with once a month. We're in a book club, and I was making the pitch about this to my friends, and then a question I couldn't answer, so I thought I'd ask you. What happens to kids in college? Do they get counted in the city they're going to college at, or do they get counted on their parents' address? Or?
I believe, I would double check this, but I believe kids get counted where they are.
Okay.
So if they're in college, they get counted at their,
Okay. I think there's a category in the census that has dormitories or something.
Yeah, they're working, the Census Bureau is working with colleges to get that word out.
Yeah.
So it's who lives, this is the rule
There.
of thumb, who lives in, so if you have to fill out the census, just pretend John's still in college.
Mm-hmm.
When you're filling out the census, it's who lives in your household on April 1st.
Okay.
That's the general rule of thumb, who lives in your house on April 1st. Physically resides
Yeah.
there April 1st. So, not to get too personal, but for me, it would probably be, my son would probably be at his mom's house, and I would probably be
So
single.
he'd get counted there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Council members, any other questions?
And
Thank
just,
you for
just
your-
for bragging rights on the line here, Wisconsin beat us the last time. We were number 2 in the country. Wisconsin was number 1 in percent return, and we were number 2, so we get bragging rights on the line with Wisconsin.
We
Thank
can
you.
do better. Thank you very much. Boards and commissions appointment process, City Manager Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. As you may remember, last year, I went to all of the city commissions. I try to meet them at least once a year, every year. And last time, the commissioners were asked to give some feedback as to how they felt about the recruitment process for new commissioners. And so I took that and went to all of the boards. I met with all 6 of them, and that included our Park and Rec, Environmental Natural Resources, Historic Preservation, Housing and Economic Development, Planning Commission, and Community Design Review Board. On the second page of your staff report, there are 9 comments that were sort of lumped together by different things, talking about things that they thought might improve the interview process and specifically, but also there was a couple of comments that I thought might have some merit, and one that caught my attention was number 6, where it says, is it possible to give preference to certain candidates, such as women, to make sure there is a diverse representation on the commissions? And most of you know that we have some work to do on that. I think Planning Commission is probably the most diverse of our advisory boards. And I thought one of the things that you might consider was seeing if that might be a role for MAC, our new multi-advisory commission, or task force, I guess they're
Committee.
called. Committee, thank you. I knew the C stood for something. So that's something to think about, too. I just wanted to put this out here for your consideration. There's absolutely no requirement that you do anything with this information other than to receive it. I think some of these are things that we really probably do already, but there were a couple comments I thought that that might make candidates feel better. There were some mixed reviews on whether you give the candidates any questions ahead of time. There were mixed reviews about having them sit up at the dais versus here. Some of them felt like it's kind of good to have candidates have to think fast on their feet and not be spoon-fed the questions. So there are variations of opinions on that, but what you see here on the 9 sentences here are just their ideas that I put together basically on what I heard from the 6 commissions. So as I mentioned, there's no action required unless you think that there's some valuable information that we might fold into the existing process.
Thank you very much for doing this. I think, as I recall the discussion at the DS, we want to make sure that we don't have any impediments to people, that they would feel uncomfortable or unaware, unprepared to come and participate in this process. A couple of things that I thought about, number 1 and 2 on this, giving the candidates a preview of what will be coming, I think that's probably a good idea. One of the concerns that I had is that our commissions are recorded. And so if people are, if they really do not want to be in a situation where they're filmed, then maybe serving on a commission may not be the
Right.
best place for them. Maybe they can, if they want to get involved, there are many other places that they could volunteer their time with our city. But certainly, I think we could, at least as part of the process, explain that during the question and answers, you'll be at the podium, this will be recorded, so that people can prepare themselves for that. Number two, I mean, it's easy enough. We could take turns welcoming them, going out and bringing them in. I'm a little hesitant. In fact, I don't really like the idea of having different questions. We want to have some, at least in my way of thinking, we want to have some uniformity with the questions so that it can't be viewed that there's some type of a bias. And so what we may want to do is maybe add a question just to start off with. It's a more general question. What, we've all reviewed your resumes. What about your background would you like to tell us in particular? That always helps people warm up a little bit at the DS so that it's a little broader before we dive into, what can they contribute to the commission?
I think that sort of gets to that number 8, maybe.
Yeah. I think that the staff liaison, I think that's a good idea to meet with a new commissioner. And maybe the chair of the commission, that would be something that they could do, is reach out to welcome them and maybe even have coffee with them before their first commission meeting. I don't know about sitting up at the DS. I just thought, I was really looking for ways that we can remove some of those barriers for people, and that's kind of what I thought. Councilmember Neblett.
Thank you, Mayor. I like a lot of these. The one thing that sticks out to me is something that you mentioned, Ms. Coleman, about, and that was number 7, not giving any information to the candidates. Because so that they can think. The thing that struck me is that even when you go for a job interview, you're given the questions before you have to sit for the interview, most of the time. Okay, well, any interview I've ever been in, you get the questions ahead of time, and you get to look at them, and then you go to sit. This isn't even at that level.
Right.
And you talk about an impediment. I think why wouldn't you want them to be able to answer the questions? Why wouldn't you want them to be calm and thoughtful? And that's the only thing that stuck out here that I really, to me, would be an impediment. And it would be great if we could have gender balance. It would be. But like you said, we're not there yet, but I think it's something that we should definitely keep in mind going forward. And I liked, I liked, we've already talked about number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 8 and 9. I thought those were all really good suggestions.
Mayor, could I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So on the gender balance or more representative of our community, what would be some ways that we could do that? One of the thoughts that I had would be to advertise in some of the non-traditional areas that we advertise in.
I think that's a great idea.
The other thing, this is a little more bold, but perhaps if we don't have a lot of choices, maybe we hold off until we get more choices. That's another thing. I wouldn't want to do that without you thinking that's a good idea, but that would be another thing to do, to just hold them for a while until we see what happens.
Part of that, though, I think it would be a discouragement to people who really are committed. I think maybe a way to do that would be a little more balanced would be at the MAC, making sure that people are aware that these commissions are available. I know I was at a neighborhood meeting on Sunday, and there were probably about 20 residents there, and I brought that up purposefully that they're a very engaged neighborhood, and I suggested that maybe some of them might be interested in joining one of our commissions, and I got an email that I forwarded to you today from one of those residents interested in what kinds of things might they be able, what kind of commissions might they be able to serve on, where are the openings? And I passed that off to you today. But I think that as a council, we could certainly work at, when we're out, having those kinds of discussions. I know Councilmember Neblett and I are going to be meeting with the faith community, that's another place where we can introduce serving on, we'll add that to our agenda, serving on one of our commissions so that we get a broad representation. I think that feels like a better way to do it than trying to hold off and keeping our commissions running short. If we really have people who are committed and ready to serve at that point, it's a matter of what can we do to get more people engaged. Councilmember Neblett.
Thank you, Mayor. I just think that with some intentionality, things change.
Yeah.
So if you want gender balance, if you want more people of color or more representation from the community, you go to those places where they are and with intention.
Yep.
So that's really my only point.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you for that. Anyone else?
So is this something you'd like me to just start incorporating into our process? Or do
You
you
know,
want it more formal, or do you want some formal action?
I
on
would
this?
just suggest, my recommendation would be certainly number one and number two, just to help people feel a little bit more comfortable as part of the process. Maybe one broader question that, to start off with, that they get an opportunity to introduce themselves. As far as giving the questions ahead of time, from my experience, that just doesn't happen in job where I represent in workplaces. They don't get the questions ahead of time.
I've gotten 5 minutes in advance and 15 minutes in advance, and then you go in and questions are there in front of you and you get to look at them like that. Sorry.
Oh, right before, so that,
Well, no, I mean, like, you're
10
seated,
minutes.
or I've been seated in the waiting area, and I've been handed the questions, and I'd get 5, 10 minutes to look them over, come in, sit down, and the questions are also taped on the table, so that if I needed to look and refresh,
I think that's a good idea to tape them on the table, because if you're a visual learner and we read the questions, that is particularly difficult for a visual learner.
Sure.
So I like that idea. Council members, what do you think about that? We tape the questions up there. Council members, what do you think about passing the questions out 10 minutes before the interview? Any other thoughts on that? Councilmember Smith.
I guess I don't have a strong feeling about making the questions available because we ask the same questions every time, and they're pretty straightforward. I don't think it's a sort of gotcha kind of
Right.
thing. And I think most people could probably anticipate what those questions were. So I think if that makes someone more comfortable in the process, I don't think there's a lot of downside to it. I think I agree with you. Most of the job interviews I go to, I don't get them. I want to start interviewing for jobs you're interviewing for because I don't get them. But
But 10 minutes before, would you agree 10 minutes before is, people can kind of collect their thoughts and.
yeah, whenever. I just think it's, all they have to do is watch the last time we did it, and they'll know what the questions are. So I don't think it's a big secret. So I guess I don't feel real strongly
Okay.
when we give it to them.
Councilmember Juniman.
Thank you. I think maybe you could combine number 3 with number 1. When you're giving them preview of what's coming,
Yeah.
give them an opportunity to think ahead of time about their specific application, but they can do it based on their own living experience, their own work experience, whatever, but so they've mulled that one over so that it's part of their introduction of themselves to everybody.
think
That
that's
would
a
probably
good idea.
make them feel better.
Sure.
And I think in terms of making this an intentional point with the council and with staff to try to, whenever we're out there, talk to people and encourage people so that we do get a broad representation of our residents. I think that would really be good.
Yeah, I think we're all ambassadors of the city, and so if you're out in the community or myself or staff are out there, if we see someone who we think might be good, there's no harm in asking. And I know my friend Suzanne is watching right now, so I'm going to say it's not too late for you to apply for a board or commission. I did have one more
A
question.
pitch it every time. That's good.
I have one more question for you, and that is, I intend to start making my rounds to the commissions here soon. And if there's any message or any questions you would like me to talk to them about, you can let me know now, or you can let me know over the next couple weeks, and I'd be happy to just bring that up.
You know, one thing from my point of view is how important they are to the work that the council does,
Yeah.
because they really help shape our city and our decision-making. And I recognize that they come out on cold nights, they sit through meetings, and they make difficult decisions, and they do their homework, and
Yeah.
we really appreciate it as the council. So if you can express that to them.
I do that. That's exactly how I start my evening with them, is thanking them. I think Mr. Knudsen was at one of the meetings where I was at, and that's what
Good.
I start with that.
Good.
Because they do a great service for our community.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a really good conversation with Commissioner Curry from the Heritage Preservation Commission. And, you know, he brought up a good point, which is I think sometimes our commissions are long-term institutions, right? For the most part, they've been with us a long time. And there may be times where they creep away from what their original mission was. There may be times when what they were intended to do in the first place starts not happening, and there's staff turnover, and so I think continue to come back to what's the mission, what do they exist to do,
Yeah.
what are they interested in doing, and what do we as a council need them to do to help inform our decisions would be really good to maybe annually just review to make sure that we have some continuity there.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing too is just to make sure we're getting the bottom of, sometimes I think it's hard, even as a council, but I think also for commissions, of figuring out like, what's our job, what's staff's job, and what's the commission's job. And I think sometimes the commissions can feel a little like staff, they're sort of the staff's tool to do
Right.
things, because it does take the staff to create the agendas and make things happen. So I think also revisiting that relationship, and do they feel that they're an independent body? Do they feel, you know, is their role appropriate to the governing of the city?
Those are all really fair questions and points that I think need to be considered. I will say with the HPC, we are really trying to work at a solution that works for them and works for the city. And there was a void when Jenny Gaynor retired for the support of the HPC. And we're struggling at finding someone, number one, who's interested in that work and knows anything about it. But I am putting a plan together, and if any of you are interested in hearing more about it, please give me a call and I can tell you where I think we're headed, at least for the time being. So we are aware of some of the struggles that they're having, but I think, Councilmember Smith, you nailed it on what is the mission. We really need to know what the mission is and what kind of resources they need, because it's really hard for us to appoint staff to be a liaison to some group, and we really don't know what it is we're trying to do. So we need to really be more focused on
That's a
that.
good
So
point.
thank you for those comments.
And, you know, I want to thank my fellow council members because, you know, tonight we're going to go through the appointments for the year. And I certainly know we have our regular council meetings, but those appointments mean that you serve as an important liaison for those commissions back here to the council. And I know that that takes extra time and effort to go to another meeting, so thank you all for doing that. It is important, I think. I think that might also be an important element for the commissions to know their representative.
Yeah.
Who is it? And to see, and I know that we can't always be there. We can watch them
Right.
and keep up to date by watching them on video, which if you can't make a commission meeting, watch it on video so that you at least know what's going on, so that you can be prepared and ready for the next meeting. Maybe even call the chair of the commission if you have any questions.
Sure.
But I think that really helps because that way they feel they will be more we'll be able to work more collaboratively, I think. So
Agree.
thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Juniman.
Thank you, Mayor. Another thing that I've done with the Environmental Resources Commission is connect with the staff liaison about a week before the meeting to see what's on deck and what's on the agenda, and, because then I can think more about, is this one I really need to be at, or I can expect calls if I might, depending on the topic, you can pretty well measure after a while when they're going to want something to bounce something off of you, so that's another idea.
That's another good idea. Thank you very much. And with that, we have worked through our agenda for our first workshop of 2020. So with that, we are adjourned